His hands were made for breaking records, lifting barbells, and winning medals. But on one cold night, they became a hammer that shattered the bones of 5 people. He was a champion, the pride of the city. They were his colleagues in a gang that everyone feared. What had to happen in that icy garage for the mountain of a man, known for his Olympic calm, to stage a bloody massacre, destroying his entire crew with his bare hands? What line did they cross, and what beast did they awaken in a man who could no longer tolerate it? This is a story about how a man breaks down and what happens when power ceases to obey the rules. To understand what exactly happened in that frozen garage on the edge of an industrial giant, we need to go back a few years to the heart of the wild 90s. Chelyabinsk in the mid-1990s was a melting pot where the Soviet past and the wild capitalist future mixed into acrid, suffocating smoke. Huge factories, which had been the pride of the country just yesterday, stood half empty, and their workers, deprived of their salaries and confidence in the future, looked on in confusion as their world collapsed. The streets of the city were permeated with a new smell, the smell of quick money and fear. The power that had previously been embodied by the party committees and the police was now flowing into the hands of those who were stronger, bolder, and more ruthless. In this new world, sports and crime became inextricably linked. Basement gyms, smelling of iron, sweat, and cheap leather substitutes, became training grounds for emerging criminal gangs. Strong guys who had been lifting weights for years suddenly found themselves in demand, not in sports arenas, but in markets, at shooting ranges, and as bodyguards for those who had managed to grab their piece of the new world. Among this army of unemployed athletes, Alexei Panov was a true legend. At 28 years old, he was a master of sports and weightlifting, a multiple regional champion, a mountain of a man with kind eyes. In the gym, he was respected not only for his phenomenal strength, but also for his remarkable calmness. He never raised his voice, did not participate in drunken feasts after training, and did not boast about his achievements. For young guys just starting in the sport, Panov was a living example of what a real man should be: strong, confident, yet not aggressive. He moved smoothly, spoke quietly, and in his presence, even the most hardened hooligans somehow calmed down. They called him our Hercules, but behind his back they added, "Not of this world." He lived and breathed sports, and it seemed that nothing could turn him from this path. But the system that created him betrayed him. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, state funding for sports dried up. Sports schools and clubs closed one after another, leaving coaches and athletes out on the street. Alexei, accustomed to a strict training routine, camps, and competitions, suddenly found himself without a salary or a goal. His medals and records became worthless overnight. In 1994, after several months of fruitless job hunting, he received an offer he could not refuse. One of his former teammates, who had long since become a new businessman, invited him to join the security detail of one of the most influential gangs in Chelyabinsk at the time. Panov hesitated for a long time. This world was alien to him. He saw these guys in expensive leather jackets and heavy gold chains, saw their contemptuous glances, and felt the threat emanating from them. But he had no choice. He had to feed his family and help his aging parents. He agreed, consoling himself with the thought that he would do his job, guard, not participate in anything illegal. At first, that was the case. His duties were humiliatingly simple: drive the boss around, carry his bags of money, and stand silently in the shadows at business meetings. His physical strength was a calling card for his boss, a demonstration of status and power. Alexei gritted his teeth and endured. He hardly spoke, his face turning into an impenetrable mask. He convinced himself that this was temporary, that soon everything would work out, and he would return to his native gym. But time passed, and he became increasingly entangled in this criminal swamp. A year later, his role changed. The group began to actively work with entrepreneurs, in other words, to engage in racketeering. Alexei began to be taken to meetings where it was necessary not just to be present, but to demonstrate physical superiority. His job was to stand by while his colleagues broke the will of uncooperative businessmen. He was the perfect tool, huge, emotionless, inspiring primal fear with his mere appearance. He didn't hit or threaten. He just stood there. And that was enough. His silent presence had a more substantial effect on people than any threats. He became indispensable, and his salary increased. But inside him, a dull, aching pain grew. He saw people he had recently known at the gym being broken, those who tried to run their small businesses honestly being humiliated. He saw the fear in their eyes, the very fear that he himself now inspired. The turning point came in the fall of 1995. The gang decided to squeeze a small grocery store out of its owner, an elderly man who had once been a wrestling coach himself and knew Alexei's father. Panov recognized him immediately. It was the same Uncle Vitya who had once taught him to take his first steps in the gym. Alexei saw how two bulls from his gang, yesterday's teenagers whom he himself had chased around the gym, began to methodically beat the old man right on the threshold of his own store. They did it slowly, with relish, in front of his crying wife. And at that moment, something inside Panov, which he had suppressed for so long and so diligently, broke with a deafening crash. He stepped forward and, in his low, calm voice, which seemed capable of stopping a tank, uttered just two words: "Enough. Leave him alone." For a moment, everyone froze. The bandits looked at their silent giant in astonishment. In their world, it was unthinkable to question an order, especially in the middle of work. The oldest of them grinned and hissed through his teeth. "Lesha, what's wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? Step aside. Don't get in the way." But Alexei did not move. He just stood there, massive and immovable as a rock, shielding the beaten old man with his body. For the first time in a year, his face was no longer a mask. It showed cold, firm determination. The conflict was only resolved with the arrival of the boss, the leader of the gang. He took Alexei aside and explained the rules of the game to him at length, in an insinuating manner. But Panov was no longer listening. He looked at the blood on the asphalt and felt something dark and icy boiling inside him. He was punished for this act, demonstratively and cruelly. A few days later, he was summoned to the base, the very basement gym that had once been his second home. 5 colleagues were waiting for him there. They didn't say a word. They just started beating him. It didn't look like a fight. It was a beating, the purpose of which was not to maim, but to humiliate. They beat him, the champion, the master of sports, with their feet and baseball bats, trying to hit him in the face and hands, the instruments of his strength. Alexei did not resist. He stood there, taking the blows, and looked each of them in the eye. He saw the fear in their eyes, which they tried to hide behind their ostentatious cruelty. They feared his strength even now, when he was alone against 5. When he fell, they kept kicking him until they were tired. Lying on the dirty floor, surrounded by scattered barbell weights, he felt no pain. He felt only a blinding, crystal-clear clarity. He realized that these people were not warriors, not men. They were a pack of jackals that could only attack the weak or unarmed. They would never stop on their own. They could only be stopped. When they let him go, he silently got up, wiped the blood from his broken lip, and walked to the exit. No one dared to stop him. That evening, the athlete Alexei Panov died inside him. Someone else was born, cold, calculating, and devoid of any emotion. He no longer tried to find excuses for himself or for them. He accepted the world as it was and decided to play by its rules until the end. He returned home, took out a clean school notebook, and began to make a list. Surnames, Nicknames, places, habits. He did it methodically, as he had previously made his training plan. His wife saw the change but was afraid to ask. His calmness had become different, ringing like a taut string. He continued to go to work, but he was no longer just an observer. He absorbed, analyzed, and memorized the information. He grew even more silent and inconspicuous, yet his gaze took on the weight of granite. The gang noticed this change, but interpreted it differently. They decided that the educational work had been beneficial, and that Lesha had finally understood his place. They did not know that he had already passed a death sentence on them all. The denouement came in February 1996. The winter that year was fierce and bitter, and the cold and coal smoke suffocated the city. The atmosphere was as oppressive as the sense of impending doom that hung in the air. Alexei understood that his decision to leave the gang would not be without consequences. In this world, you didn't just quit. Those who knew too much were taken care of. He knew he was already being followed, that his every move was being monitored. He himself had arranged a farewell meeting, choosing a location clearly disadvantageous to him, an abandoned garage cooperative on the very outskirts of the Traktorozavodsky district. It was their favorite place for serious conversations, a remote, snow-covered labyrinth of rusting metal boxes where the howling wind drowned out any cry. He said he wanted to talk to the brigade one last time, give up his share, and leave town. It was a trap, and he knew it perfectly well, but he walked into it consciously. On the evening of that fateful day, he arrived at the place alone, in his friend's old Moskvich. He left the car a little way off and walked deep into the cooperative. They were waiting for him. 5 men came out of one of the garages, the same ones who had beaten him up in the gym, and their unofficial leader, the boss's right-hand man. They were confident of their superiority. 5 against 1, in a secluded place, with no witnesses. They didn't even bring firearms with them. Why bother, when Lesha never carried one and always relied only on his fists? They wanted to do it slowly, as they liked. What exactly happened next inside that icy metal coffin was pieced together, bit by the investigators. The scene that greeted the police task force the next morning was horrific. The call came from a passerby who noticed the garage door ajar and bloody footprints in the snow. Inside, in the dim light of the flashlights, lay 5 bodies. But this did not look like a typical criminal showdown. The air was thick with the smell of blood and primal rage. The room was trashed, as if 2 enraged bears had fought there. There were dents in the walls, broken furniture, and scattered tools everywhere. But the most frightening thing was the nature of the injuries. The forensic expert, an elderly man who had seen a lot, later admitted that he had never encountered anything like it. The victims had almost all their bones broken, ribs, limbs, cervical vertebrae. Their skulls had been smashed with blunt objects, pieces of rebar and hammers that were lying around. There were no bullet or knife wounds. All the injuries had been inflicted with tremendous superhuman force in close combat. This was not a fight, it was extermination. It was as if something massive and relentless had methodically destroyed its opponents, one by one. One of the bodies had a footprint of size 46 on it, left with such force that the chest was literally crushed inward. The investigators immediately understood that this was not the work of an ordinary killer. This was the work of a professional, a master of hand-to-hand combat, driven to the extreme. It was not difficult to track down Panov. His name was the first to come up when questioning people from the criminal world. In his friend's car, which Alexei had allegedly used to leave the city, investigators found his sports jacket. There was a dark stain on the sleeve. The examination confirmed that it was blood, and the blood of one of the victims. During a search of his apartment, they found the notebook with the list behind an old bookcase. Neat crosses were marked opposite 5 names. It resembled the diary of a hunter, cold-bloodedly marking his prey. When they came for him, he was at his parents' house in a neighboring town. He did not hide. Seeing the people in uniform at the door, he silently held out his hands for the handcuffs. He did not resist or ask any questions. His face was once again that same impenetrable mask, but now there was neither fear nor pain in his eyes, only endless, icy fatigue. During the first interrogation, when the investigator, trying to snap him out of his stupor, asked if he understood what he had done, Alexei quietly replied with one sentence that became the leitmotif of the entire case. "I just stopped those who don't know how to stop." Alexei Panov's case became a bomb that exploded in the silence of prosecutors' offices and courtrooms. It was uncomfortable, complicated, and entirely out of place in the usual framework of criminal news. On the one hand, it was the brutal, cold-blooded murder of 5 people. On the other hand, it was the story of a man driven into a corner by a system he did not choose. The lead investigator in the case, Police Captain Igor Zakharov, a man with 20 years of experience, admitted to his colleagues that he had never encountered anything like it in his entire career. Interrogating Panov was like talking to a wall. Alexei sat upright, staring at a single point, and responded to most questions either with silence or monosyllabic answers. Yes. No. I don't remember. He did not try to lie or evade questions. It was as if he had already accepted his fate and was waiting for it all to end. He recounted in detail and without emotion how he had joined the gang, how he had been forced to participate in extortion, and how he had been beaten. But when the conversation turned to the events in the garage, he clammed up. His only comment was that phrase about those who don't know when to stop. He did not ask for leniency or show remorse. This calmness frightened the investigators more than any hysteria or aggression. It was inhuman. The trial of Alexei Panov turned into a real public event. The courtroom was always packed. People came to look into the eyes of the Chelyabinsk Hercules, as journalists dubbed him. Public opinion was divided. For some, he was a cold-blooded monster, a gangster who destroyed his accomplices in the struggle for power or money. For others, he was a folk avenger, a man who single-handedly did what the police had not dared to do for years. His story became a symbol of the times, a time when the line between good and evil had been blurred, and the law was no longer a protection. The prosecution based its case on irrefutable facts: 5 corpses, a list in a notebook as evidence of intent, and a blood-stained jacket. The prosecutor, a young and ambitious careerist, painted a portrait of a calculating killer who, having acquired a taste for criminal life, decided to take the place of the leader by eliminating his competitors. He emphasized the brutality of the murders, the fact that Panov had left none of them a chance of survival. This was not self-defense, honorable jury. This was execution, his voice boomed in the courtroom. Panov's lawyer, an elderly and respected city figure assigned to him by the state quota, faced an almost impossible task. He decided to build his defense on the concept of exceeding the limits of necessary defense, committed in a state of intense emotional agitation. Step by step, he reconstructed the story of Alexei's downfall. He called his old coach as a witness, who, with tears in his eyes, described Lesha as a bright and decent guy. He called the very same Uncle Vitya, the shop owner, who confirmed that Panov had saved him from certain punishment, risking his own position. The key moment in the trial was the testimony of an expert psychologist. He explained that constant stress, feelings of guilt, and, most importantly, physical and moral humiliation during the beating could have triggered a so-called cumulative effect in Panov. His psyche, hardened over years of overcoming physical pain, had accumulated enormous tension, which ultimately found an outlet in the form of uncontrollable, destructive aggression. "He didn't kill people in that garage," said the psychologist. "He destroyed the source of his pain, his humiliation. His brain was in survival mode at that moment, perceiving the attackers not as individuals, but as a single, deadly threat." The lawyer argued that Alexei came to the meeting unarmed, intending only to talk. An ambush awaited him. 5 men, determined to kill him in a confined space. What was he supposed to do? Appeal to their conscience? Wait until they beat him to death with rebar? He used the only weapon he had, his body, his skills, honed to perfection through years of training. Yes, he exceeded the limits of self-defense. But could he have accurately calculated the force of his blows in that situation? Could he have thought about humanism while fighting off 5 men? The court listened, and the room was deathly silent. The story from the crime report was turning into an ancient Greek tragedy about a hero forced to become a monster. Even the judge, a stern older man, seemed to be wavering. But the law is the law. And the letter of the law was inexorable. The fact that 5 people had been killed could not be denied. And the list in the notebook, which the defense tried to present as a simple threat analysis, was successfully presented by the prosecution as a plan for cold-blooded revenge.